Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Paul Butler. I'm the Bishop of Durham, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And I'm joined by Sheridan Voisey.
It is a great privilege to be with you, Bishop Paul. I mean, this is just so good. If you're watching on my Facebook page and you know a little bit about my background, you know that I probably already know that I have a love for this part of the world. A few years ago, a friend and I did a pilgrimage up this way, and I just fell in love with the north of England. I fell in love with all of the great missionaries like Aidan and Cuthbert and Bede and Hilda, who have really transformed this part of the world and then the rest of the world. And Bishop Paul is in the direct succession of these people, so it's just a great privilege for me to be a part of this.
So to explain your point there, Aidan was the very first Bishop of Lindisfarne, 534. Cuthbert was one of his successors in the 680s. When Cuthbert's body was moved from Chester Street to Durham in 995, Alton, who was then the Bishop of Lindisfarne, the last ever Bishop of Lindisfarne, there's never been one since, he became the Bishop of Durham. So every Bishop of Durham ever since has been in this line all the way back to Aidan and to Alden. But we're not in Durham, we're in Bishop Auckland.
In your backyard?
In my backyard, yes, it's not a bad view.
It's beautiful.
But Bishop Auckland has also been the home of the Bishops of Durham.
This place, this whole region is named after him. Bishop
Land
Auckland.
of the Prince Bishops. Auckland Castle, which was the historic home of the bishops here, is about a mile away from where we're sitting, and my office is still there.
Yes.
But
and a few years ago would have been your home.
a few years ago was my predecessor's home, yes, but is now being transformed into a major visitor centre, and in a year's time the Museum of Faith in these islands will be opening up at Auckland Castle and will be telling the history of faith in these islands, which will include all the story of how Christianity came to the northeast. That's a whole new wing that's been built, but it's not opening till next year.
Wow.
So,
Astounding.
but we are about to go on part of what you and DJ did.
Yes.
It's one of the new Northern Saints trails called the Way of Learning. We start tomorrow morning in Jarrow, and we will walk to Monk Wearmouth and then on successive days. But that's tomorrow's route. And those are the two key places for Bede.
Yes.
So why did you fall in love with Bede?
Well, is it okay to just mention
of course.
and just put it up here? Buy it now. So this is the book that I wrote as a result of doing a pilgrimage up here in the north back in 2013. It took me 5 years to write the book, another year for it to come out. And it came out a couple of years ago, and it's been the most important book for me to write because it really marked something, the big change that happened in my life as a result of moving here to the United Kingdom, asking big questions about who I am, what I was doing here, all those kinds of things. The subtitle is Who You Can Become When Life Doesn't Go As Planned. Life hadn't gone to plan for my wife and I, and the pilgrimage was a really key part of me coming up here and coming up with my friend DJ, doing a walk from Lindisfarne Island further up the north for all the non-Brits that are watching, and spending 8-9 days making our way down to Durham, learning about these great missionaries, these great saints like Cuthbert and Bede. I was really focused on Cuthbert because Cuthbert was this wonderful man of God, a man of the Bible, a man of prayer, a man of miracles, all sorts of things, a man of the poor, but we wouldn't know about Cuthbert without Bede. And so that's how I got to know about Bede. So I discovered that here is this guy who is the first historian in English. And in fact, a lot of what we know about the country goes back to his book, The History of the English People.
Here we are, The Ecclesiastical History of the English People.
Here we are.
By Bede. You can buy that too. It's a Penguin classic, but there you go.
But it's not as good as this one.
No, it's not as good as that one. Now, as you're watching, and we do want this to be a conversation, not just this evening, but over the successive nights. So do feel free to send in questions if you want. Stick them in, and we'll pick up those questions towards the end of our conversation.
And share this
please
as well.
share it as well, because we want more people to join in. Bede was what we'd now call a polymath. So we'll pick up different things on different evenings. But this evening I want to pick on the fact he was a historian, an astronomer, a mathematician.
And those two together,
Yeah.
he, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, but wasn't he the guy who came up with the first date for Easter,
He was involved in that, yes.
and which is still used by the Eastern and Orthodox churches today? So he's the guy behind that. He's the guy who gave us AD and BC. So here we all have a connection to Bede, even if we've never heard of him before. He's the guy that has dated the fact that we're in 2021. And then, so just with those two, he also was one of the first scientists to work out the impact of the planets on the tidal systems that we have. So he really was a polymath. And if you ever get a chance, for those of you who aren't in Britain and you're watching, and if you ever get the chance to come up to the north of England, go to a place that is now called Jarrow Hall, and you'll be able to see these wings of Bede's life. And I think that was the thing that really helped to switch me on to Bede as well.
Yeah.
That when DJ and I went to this place, and so there's a whole wing for Bede the scholar, Bede the poet, Bede the theologian, Bede the astronomer, Bede the mathematician. So he was quite astounding a person, and I think this is a really reason why I just kind of go, wow, what a guy. And he's kind of the kind of key figure for this particular pilgrimage then.
Yeah, because the route takes us on to these two monasteries that were his two homes. He was put into the monastery at Monk Wearmouth as a small child, and then when they needed new people up, he was still a child when he went up to Jarrow with Colfrith, who was the new abbot, and then spent most of the rest of his life at Jarrow. Now, people won't have heard of Jarrow and Monk Wearmouth, not even in England. A lot of though they'll associate Jarrow, those who understand their working class history well, because of the Jarrow marches, which happened back in the 1920s, but 1930s. But one of the things I love about Bede is he studied the stars. He worked out that the Earth was not flat. A lot of people tend to think that those who lived in the late 7th century, early 8th century, all assumed that the Earth was flat, and so he worked out that it couldn't possibly be flat because of what he saw, and he realised that he saw stars in different places, and he calculated therefore the Earth must have curves and be round.
This is 8th century, early 8th century.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what does that scholarly? This was a deeply Christian man who was a deep scholar. What does that say to you and to us all about the place of scholarship for those who follow Jesus?
Yes. This is the reason why I'm so excited to be on this pilgrimage, and thank you again for the invitation, because I get to come back, and I get to go to, tomorrow we start off at Jarrow. We get to start off in this, what was a model monastery, and we get to the next day, we get to go to the second monastery, St. Peter's down in Monk Wearmouth. I get to go back to these places that are 1,300 years old. I get to see all this, and I'll go back to an experience that DJ and I had when we first came up here, because I'm wondering if it's going to happen again. So here we went and we looked around this great monastery in Jarrow, and to see that it wasn't just a place of prayer and worship, it was actually a place of art. There was a scriptorium where there was all sorts of beautiful artwork that was done, and the copying out of Bede's books, because Bede was a bit of a rock star in the day in the scholarly world, and his books about nature and gosh, we didn't mention biology and nature. His books about that as well, and his poetry and his theological commentaries, his biblical commentaries were being spread everywhere, and so they were copied in the scriptorium. It's also a place where stained glass was made, some of the earliest, if not the earliest, stained glass. So this is a whole world was represented in this place, and I think a long way to get back to your question, Paul. I think what hit me then was the fact that so often we can think of Christian faith as really relegated to, well, it's about my soul, it's about getting to heaven after I die, and yes, it brings benefits now and all of that, and I get to enjoy God's presence and everything. Actually, the early saints, they showed us a whole worldview that the Christian faith brought, and it had something to say about science and biology and poetry and history. And you had these people like Bede who were showing that it wasn't unnatural. We've almost had to claw that back in recent years, don't you think? We've almost had to kind of, we talk about, having a whole life approach to discipleship these days, where we've got wonderful organizations like the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity that are focused on getting us to re-see our callings, our professions, our work that we do from Monday to Friday as something that also the Christian faith has something to say. These guys were doing it 1,300 years ago.
Yeah.
That's what touches me, I think. What about for you?
Yeah, so I absolutely, I mean, in terms of higher education, I suppose this country is best known now for Oxford and Cambridge. You live in Oxford. Of course, the University in Durham will claim that they're right up there with them, and certainly the theology department is ahead of Oxford and Cambridge. There's no question about that. Jarrow and Monk Wearmouth were the Oxford and Cambridge of the late 7th and the 8th century in this country. They were the centres of learning. Benedict Biscop, who was the founder, he toed and froed to Rome 4 times, if I remember rightly. And every time he went to Rome, he brought back books after books. And we have to remember, of course, they were not in this wonderful little format.
No.
They were huge, great tomes. And they built up this enormous library in these 2 places. And there was, but they believed that holding on to a conviction that God is the creator of all things and that Jesus came into the world out of love for us and to rescue us and deliver us, and that the incarnation and his death and his resurrection was all about that, meant study and learning and discovery was part and parcel of their calling. So science wasn't against religion. Science flowed from a conviction about God, because you're discovering God's created, extraordinary created stuff.
Yes.
After you're delving into what God has already put there.
Called the Book of Creation as well as the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
So where do you think, I'm interested now, where you think things went awry? Because we've had to kind of get back into that, and there's been this war against science and faith and all of that. They had no problems back then.
No, it's hard to know where, because if you go a bit further on, this is a very different. The Bishop of Lincoln, Bishop Grosseteste, he was one of the greatest scientists of the medieval era. But then, because what everybody cites to us now is, what did the church do to Galileo? And in the 16th, they appear to be antagonistic to Copernicus and to Galileo because they seem to be questioning what, and so on. So something went wrong along there. But of course, those men, and sadly it was all men at that point. Thankfully now we're in a world where women are as equal in science. They were. They never thought they weren't doubting God. They weren't actually doubting the Christian story either. They were just saying they were discovering more and so on.
Yes.
And indeed, some of my predecessors as bishops of Durham were great scholars. I am the second Bishop Butler in Durham. I am. There was a Bishop Butler in the 1750s, and he was renowned as a philosopher. And one of the things was the philosophy of science that he worked on then. So it's been an ongoing tussle and wrestle. I like to think we're getting back into a better place.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I think we're potentially getting back into a better place, is because scientists themselves are very honest about what they don't know, as much as what they do know. And that I love the scientists who say, we keep discovering more. That only raises more questions about what we don't know and what there is yet more to discover, which is hardly surprising. And if we have a conviction in an infinite God who's created this incredible universe and probably multiverses, to be discovered. That's what our calling is
Yes.
creative being.
Yes, yes. So interesting. See, the other thing that comes to my mind when we have this kind of discussion is also then, okay, where did we kind of lose that sense in which everything, science, art, poetry, the whole lot,
Yeah.
all comes under, the lordship of Christ, and also comes under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But also this, I think, a conversation about giftedness as well.
Yes.
So, and I talk about this a little bit in the making of us, because I've wrestled a little bit, because depending on which part of the church world you come from, spiritual gifts, certain ones will be raised up and other ones will be left behind. And so if you're kind of a part of an evangelical background like I am, well, the giftings that have been really emphasized, really important, are evangelism, maybe teaching, missionary gifts, those kinds of things, maybe teaching. If you're in more charismatic Pentecostal circles, it'll be, healing and prophecy and speaking in tongues. If it's more traditional, or more maybe what we might say theologically liberal areas, it'll be, works of mercy, acts of justice, those kinds of things. So depending on the background that we've had, certain gifts will be raised up, certain gifts won't. I remember once watching the movie Mr. Holland's Opus. Did you see that? It's a few years old now. Okay, it's a few years old. Well worth the view. It's about this musician. It's about this this performer, and he's writing this opus, but he's also a teacher in a high school teaching music to earn a living. And ultimately, he goes through his whole life, and he never gets to play this opus, and he retires, and it looks like he's going to be forgotten by his students. And sorry, spoiler alert coming. But his students end up performing it for him, and it's this amazing moment at the end. I watched that with my wife, and I said to my wife, "What an amazing film! Look at the way his work did continue, and it was celebrated, and his students didn't forget him. It was all wonderful." And she kind of sat there looking at this, and said, "They never make films like that about statisticians." My wife is a statistician. She has been the lead statistician on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine recently. She's been very busy. And you know what? It's right.
Yes.
When we celebrate gifts, either in the church or the world, and in the world, what are the gifts we celebrate? The performers, the artists, the musicians, the fashion designers, so do we celebrate? Do we celebrate people like Keith, who's doing the sound and the audio for us and the video for us? Do we celebrate the statisticians and the mathematicians or the scientists? And this is why I'm excited about this pilgrimage and about Bede, because again, it brings us back to the fact every gift and every calling has a place in the kingdom of God, and everyone's important.
So you've kind of triggered one of the things. I took what was called 11 plus when I was young, and it meant I went to a grammar school in this country. And one of the things that I have always regretted as an older person is that in my school that I went to, we never did anything with woodwork or metalwork or plastics, or the school felt itself above those things. So so it's not just the kind of world of scholarship and learning that we undervalue giftedness. Right. I think we undervalue the practical gift as well. The electricians, the plumbers, the bricklayers, people can't see this magnificent house that we live in. It's been here for 104 years, and I'm in awe of the people who laid the foundations and put this stuff up, and it stood firm for 104 years. Yeah, you have to do bits of repairs from time to time, but those are huge gifts, and
100 years later affecting you.
Yeah, and in church life, when I was a parish priest in East London in Walthamstow, I quite often try to say this to churches now. The most important person for me was the person who welcomed at the door on a Sunday morning. Right. We could do the best stuff we could up front, but if you got the welcome wrong, we were stuffed.
Right. Absolutely. Right. Who's going to return?
So it's about celebrating giftedness in its full orbedness.
Yes.
In every walk of life.
Yes. Yeah. And when DJ and I first came up here, it was interesting because we walked away and DJ had been very emotionally moved by seeing the work of Bede. And he had spent a lot of time in the section in Jarrow Hall called Bede the Scholar, because actually that's DJ's calling. He's a theologian, very much like that. And he said it was really affirming that here, there were historic nerds like him that, were really celebrated, that his calling to be a thinker and to be a writer of profound thoughts was actually valued. And so I guess that's our focus tonight on this live stream, is just that kind of the way of learning is the name of the pilgrimage we're doing over the next few days. But tonight, the real focus on, being called to learn and called to grow. And I wonder whether there's a calling for all of us there. We may not be scholars, but, growing, learning.
Yeah, no, and it's a life. It is a lifelong thing, isn't it? I mean, actually, what we're doing a year ago. What's a Facebook Live?
Right.
What's all this? I mean, I still haven't learned it. Really, I've relied on Keith to make it happen. But there's always more to learn, always more to discover. I think that was one of the remarkable things about Bede, that to the day he died, he was studying more, learning more, writing, never stopped. And I think it would be interesting in tomorrow's walk as we go from Jarrow to Monk Wearmouth, to find out what we spot on the way and what we reflect on by the end of tomorrow about learning, about discovery, about being lifelong learners, which is that's the in phrase, isn't it? But that's what we are.
Yes. So apart from Facebook Live, where are you most kind of growing, most learning yourself? Bishop Hall of Durham.
Goodness.
What's been taking your attention? What have you been particularly focusing on?
So what takes a lot of my attention now, to explain to those who from other parts of the globe, the Bishop of Durham is automatically a member of the House of Lords. So that's the revising chamber of the English Parliament. We're not elected; we're appointed in a different way. And there are 26 bishops in there. It's an enormous privilege. This is something I never ever anticipated I'd be involved with. But that means you get involved in legislative processes and so on. And one of the things that takes a lot of my so I am the lead bishop for education in the Church of England. So right now, one of the focuses is actually our government has recognised afresh the importance of lifelong learning. There's a new bill coming which is going to give people access to a right to lifelong education in a new way, and finances to be able to support that. And that's why. So and the focus of that further education rather than higher education is much more on skills and the things that we need to make the country tick, really. So there's a lot of learning about how we go about making sure that those processes are in the right place and that we have the best colleges available for people who want to go into social care and so on.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. Now,
fascinating.
We asked people if there's any questions. I don't know.
Let's have a look.
Let's have a look.
See if anybody's.
Just a reminder, you can send in questions, but it does rely on Sheridan actually spotting them on the page. So
it does, and I am just having a quick look here because let me just refresh and do all these things that take a little bit of time.
I've got one for you.
Okay, that's Keith's
Thank
voice.
you, Keith.
How often, though, do we underestimate the capacity and thirst of our congregations to learn?
How often do we underestimate the capacity of our congregations and thirst to learn? Sadly, I think we probably do it too often. I don't know. What do you think, Sheridan? Do you think people underestimate the desire of people to learn in church?
I wonder again whether it comes down to which kind of circles of church you move in, because there are some circles of church for which the mind is incredibly important, and so there's the real focus on expository Bible teaching and really getting into Bible study and industrial strength King James only Bible, so all of that kind of stuff that have. So for some areas, actually, that's the excessive focus maybe, and actually the life of the heart and the spirit also needs to kind of be balanced up. I wonder whether in some cases we can, yes, maybe focus so much on liturgy that we need to be expanded more, or so much on the experiential side of ecstatic worship that actually we need to go deeper. And I think often people will then find themselves kind of clawing out and saying, well, I want to grow, I want to learn more, I want to grow in some area. I wonder whether actually an important thing to throw in here is actually big questions and doubt. I have found that it's when I've been wrestling with something that has made me grow and learn more. It has forced me to actually get in there and to do some hard study. And sometimes it's actually really uncomfortable because you're not too sure where you're going to land at the end. That's when I grow the most, is when I've really kind of struggled with those and wrestled with those kinds of things.
It's also made me think, though, about a very good friend of mine who was a superintendent in the Metropolitan Police in London, who was at one point responsible for whether or not armed police could go on the streets. And as you'll know now, armed police on the streets in England is not the norm.
No.
So it was a huge responsibility. And he always used to say to me, please don't ask me to do too much when I come into church on Sunday, because I'm so stressed with the responsibilities. Actually, what I need is simply to be allowed to be in the presence of God and be renewed. Yes, equip me to be a good follower of Jesus as a senior policeman, but sometimes I just need to be able to sit back and relax. So that's a good challenge for church leaders, isn't it? Because we should be stretching people, encouraging them to learn, but actually also recognizing that sometimes people just need to be able to kind of let go and lean back into God's love.
Yes.
And just know that they're loved again.
Yes. Do you think there's seasons in our life where we have a season where we grow, and maybe a season where we
I think that's right.
tread water, but there's a certain sense of kind of almost retreating just for a period of time, maybe.
I'm absolutely sure, because particularly when life's troubles hit us hard, actually sometimes we just need to know we're being loved.
Yes.
And don't ask me to be stretched in any way at that point, because I'm feeling stretched enough because of life stress. So yes, I think there are seasons where we grow more. I was with my 2-year-old grandson the other day, and being told that he's just been on a growth burst, and because that's what we do actually, as particularly small children, and then through, I remember when I was a teenager there was a period where suddenly my trousers were 2 inches short, when last week they were fine. So if that happens physically, then I guess that actually happens in other ways of growing.
Yes, yeah. I think another thing is, follow your curiosity as well.
Yes.
I mean, there will be some things in which at this present moment you're probably thinking, gosh, I'm really interested in this or that. And I think the great call for people of faith is to think and learn and grow in those things in a uniquely Christian way. It's not just simply learning about something, but it's about thinking about it Christianly. And I think that's both the challenge, but that's the invitation.
Yeah.
That's where the life is. The life is where God is at work, in the beauty of the creation, in the trees and the birds that hopefully you can hear, in the rain that's starting to fall on us, and everything else that you have there to us.
We're very thankful to God that actually the rain has held
It's not
off,
bad.
aren't we?
It's not bad, is it? Thank you, Lord.
So tomorrow we are walking from Jarrow to Monk Wearmouth, and tomorrow evening at 7 we will be from Monk Wearmouth. We're going to be joined by my colleague, the Bishop of Jarrow, Sarah, tomorrow evening. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we look forward to tomorrow. And send us questions.
We will answer them. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.